This is Steve Clark, President and CEO of the Massachusetts Restaurant Association. I'm here with VP of Operations, Kerry Miller, and you're listening to the MRA podcast, Together We Win, where we give you bites of information in podcast form. All right, we are back with our next episode of Together We Win, the MRA podcast. Kerry, we've been talking a lot about restaurant growth. During the pandemic, a number of places closed. Unfortunately, we lost, actually probably 22% of the industry at the height of the pandemic. But it seems that a number of restaurants are opening, new locations across the city and across Massachusetts. It seems that, the industry is truly back and we're actually in an expansion mode right now.
Yeah, I couldn't be more excited about what we're talking about today because I remember about 5 years ago, somebody said, hey, let's go down to the waterfront in Somerville. And I went, there's a waterfront in Somerville? And over the course of the last 5 years, you drive to Somerville, you drive to the seaport, and it's like a new building happening on a daily basis. And with that comes new restaurants and new opportunity for restaurateurs in these processes. We got two great people here today to talk to that about, for sure.
Absolutely. We always, at MRA, we always get a lot of questions about growth and aspiring restaurateurs. How do they get into their second location? How do they get into their first location? How do they get into a lifestyle center? So really excited about today's guests. And without further ado, let's introduce them and get them part of the conversation so people just aren't watching you and I banter back and forth. Ladies first, of course.
Thank you.
We have Liz Ryan. She's the Vice President of Regional Leasing at Federal Realty. Better known as the proprietor and owner of Assembly Row and also Linden Square in Wellesley, correct?
Yep, among others, yep.
Absolutely. And of course, we have chef owner Chris Damian, Papagayo, SIP, Civility Social House, an unbelievable restaurateur that's had a lot of success in Boston and neighboring suburbs. So, Chris, thank you very much for coming in. And
Thanks for having me.
Chris has brought us a little bit of food as well. Before we get into opening a restaurant, you need to have a good product. So,
Always
Chris,
true.
what do we have in front of us here?
So this is a couple of street tacos that I brought. One is with adobo chicken. Make a marinade, sear it over hot coals, and then just slice it. And the other one is a braised short rib with guajillo chilies.
I'm going to start with that one first. I'm going to go over to that side while we dig into things
So
here.
I'm looking at the guacamole on the top, and if I've got one favorite thing that I've ever had at Papagayo, it was to tableside guac. And you guys probably would, I don't know if you introduced it to the population, but everybody's doing it now. Nobody's doing it as good as you guys do it.
I appreciate that. We were really fortunate in our first restaurant when we rolled that out. And it ended up being, we had 3 different people just running carts in the dining room. Never expected it to be as popular as it was.
Cocktail and some guac.
That's it.
It was
all you need.
perfect.
So, Liz, as we talk about the evolution of lifestyle centers, we're very fond of talking about restaurants. It's the last bastion of social interaction. Everything is on the phone these days. Everything is outside, and people crave human interaction. And what better place to do that is a restaurant. From a lifestyle center perspective, how does that drive the businesses you try to attract and try to build that? And what goes into a successful lifestyle center? I mean, Assembly Row is one of the most successful ones probably in the Northeast. So what went into building that? What goes into the thought process of making that happen?
So before we start sort of reaching out to restaurant tenants or, engaging in sort of what we envision from a merchandising standpoint, we take a step back and we look at what's the market that we're serving? Who's that customer? What does that customer profile look like? And what do they want? What's missing in a market? What are the uses that will resonate with the people that we serve? And so we literally will sit down with a blank plan. And in the case of Assembly, we identify, these are the locations where we envision restaurants being. When you're working on these larger mixed use buildings, you have to think about, venting and the infrastructure that goes into it. So when a building isn't existing at that moment, we have to think about, okay, these corners are where we think restaurants would do well. And these are the types of uses that we think would resonate, again, with the customers that we serve. So then we compile a list of tenants that we think, have a strong track record or might offer something unique that, that would sort of put us on the map from an offering standpoint, and we get to work from there. But to your point, restaurants have really become sort of an anchor tenant in our line, in our side of things. And so we really take a thoughtful approach with how we merchandise restaurants and how we engage with our restaurant partners. And, we value those relationships.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think first and foremost, you and I talking a little bit earlier about the fact that retail's gone the way of the internet, and those baseline things restaurant driven right now. And you guys, what's that saying from Man on Fire? Painted a masterpiece on. You can go to Assembly Row, and I'm not just saying this to say it, but you can walk around the outside of that thing and have an incredibly different experience in every one of those doors you walk into. You can spend some time at Papagayo. You can go to Earl's. You can hit Legals. You can hit River Bar. I mean, and around the corner you've got Fuji. I mean, so for anybody that's looking for an afternoon experience or something like that, it's like going to a little town in Europe and having a whole different experience. And so just the way that you situated those restaurants, there has to be a science involved in that.
Yeah, thank you. We take a very thoughtful approach, and not just with restaurants, with all of the tenants that we put into our projects. Assembly has become a neighborhood. And so when people refer to it as, a shopping center, I always stop them and say, this is really a small city that we've built and will continue to build. So we are very pleased with the success of the restaurants. Those are one of our highest, per square foot performers in terms of the different categories of tenants. And it just really strengthens the sense of community when you go to Assembly, when you see all of the restaurant activity.
We get a lot of questions from restaurateurs of how do I get into a place like that? Mm-hmm. Is it, do I have to have a known location, and do I have to be a known name, or can I go and pitch an idea? What's the different thought processes of bringing? Because there's so many different choices of restaurateurs that you have, so many high quality restaurateurs. How do you choose? Who do you pursue? Do you get pursued? Mm-hmm. Is it a natural partnership? Talk about that process a little bit.
So it's a little bit of both. We are absolutely open to supporting, first-time restaurant owner-operators. If you're a chef who wants to, try something new and open a restaurant, I would encourage you to put together a thorough business plan, a pro forma that can help us understand the financial, side of how you're looking at your business operations. When sometimes I'll talk to prospective restaurant operators and they'll say, we don't have a design package yet, but we're envisioning it looking and feeling sort of like this. And I'll say, well, can you even just go online and find photos of existing restaurants that you would use as sort of a vision, put together a vision board essentially, and just help us understand the look, the feel, the quality of what it is you are thinking of doing. Send us a sample menu so we can understand, obviously what you're thinking from a food offering perspective. But we are willing, as an owner landlord, we are willing to work with tenants who might not necessarily have a proven track record yet, but we know that they have really good potential based on their personal and professional experience. So that's usually, if it's a first-time restaurant owner operator, that's sort of the approach that we take. If there are chefs that are well-known, that clearly have a proven track record that we know would be what we call a game changer tenant for one of our properties, call it Assembly, we will absolutely, pursue them and figure out a way to put something together that works for everybody.
Chris, you went in early on, so you're one of those game changing people that have a brand that went in. What was it made at Assembly? Because when you went into Assembly, it doesn't look like it looks like now.
Well, it's interesting you say that as Liz is talking. I'm trying to think back of when we originally committed to going in there. And I know it was before our first Papagayo was open.
Wow.
So we committed with one of her people on her team from Washington, D.C. He was referred to us because we were starting to grow up here. We had a number of different brands running, and Papagayo in South Boston was about to be open, and we met Stu. Mm-hmm. And he was explaining what the vision of the development was like, and we're like, oh, so you mean like the Burlington Mall? He was like, yeah, but not that. And I said, oh, you mean like this one? Yeah, but not that. So a month later, flew down to DC. He took us around to the properties they have. And I was like, oh, I get it now. Because we didn't have anything like that in our markets up here. So the density, the residential component, the neighborhood, the identity of different brands all coexisting together. I was like, I can see it now.
Yeah, now you say they make the connections. We have family down in DC. We go down a lot. There's Resden. There's all of these communities that are not unlike Assembly Row all together. So I can see where you would look at that and go, holy crap, this is a great place for a restaurant to be located at.
I was asking questions that seem so far-fetched now because you see where the project is at. I go, what are you going to do about the element or crime or any of that stuff? And yeah, don't worry. You'll see it in a few years. You'll understand it.
Takes care of itself.
It takes care of itself. And it's just fascinating to see where I grew up and, used to patronize the marketplace side. That was the mall for us, that and Meadow Glen Mall. And now you say what Assembly Row is. It's totally different.
It's going to be an incredibly restaurant community down there, because you look at the names of the people that are restaurateurs at Assembly Row right now. Andy's down there, and the Legals folks are down there, and the folks from Earl's from Canada there. So you got to be able to have I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing for you, but there's got to be like a great relationship between all of the restaurateurs, and I'm sure it's a good thing for you.
Oh, it's a great thing for us. And we embrace those relationships. We want to be involved with our tenants. We want to help promote their businesses, but we also want them to feel a sense of community among each other.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, you're as an operator, you've been in the city of Boston, you've been in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to open up a new location, what do you look for? What are some of the things that a community has that attracts you to go there when you're looking for your next opportunity?
First and foremost, I look for it basically re-engineering the back end of a deal. Where's the void in concept-wise? So if you take Assembly Row, there wasn't really any Mexican at the time. And even before we did that, we did a concept called Burger Dive that was on the pad site entering Assembly Row. That was the first leased space that opened in the development. And truthfully, it was ahead of its time because we were trying to do like hand-formed press burgers from scratch. And we didn't get a chance to educate the consumer. We thought there was a void, and you see burger shops everywhere now, right? But we thought there was a huge void in that fresh, grass-fed, fast casual, counter service model. And it was something that we had to change. I think it was 75 different procedures, pricing, purchasing, portions, all things to target the consumer effectively. And then after we did those 75 things, we said, can't do anymore, because we realized we would have ended up with something that we didn't want, and that wouldn't have been the concept. So walking a fine line, you might be a trailblazer in one point, but you could go broke thinking that you're a trailblazer. So you got to adapt and find out, okay, the consumer wants this. How do we accomplish both things and make them happy and survive at the same time? And it was a super, super successful concept. And that's one thing. One big thing is finding out where the food void is. The second part is where is your hiring infrastructure? Mm-hmm. So with the orange line that's there, there's access to trains. You'd see the density of different cities around it that you can have a hiring base. And I've learned this from being up in New Hampshire, having problems hiring people with restaurants. And you say, I don't want to be in New Hampshire trying to hire anybody. And that's one of the benefits of looking at that. Even if you're in Boston, getting there is nothing. Orange line drops you off.
Absolutely.
So those are probably the two major things. Relationships with vendors and all that stuff are easy. It's not that far out of town. And even with local growers, we can find a lot of different things at deliveries and things like that. So access to product is not an issue for us.
Absolutely. No, go ahead, Gary.
It's amazing that site selection is based on the ability to staff the restaurant these days. But there's been multiple restaurants up in New Hampshire. I remember 900 Degrees went into Portsmouth, and they opened up. They spent 1.5 to open up a restaurant there, and they had to shut it down because they couldn't staff it on the opening. I mean, so right,
Scary stuff.
Yeah, so there better be some thought process, and having the orange line come through where you're going to be opening, a multi-million-dollar property in order to the fact that you can actually put people in to serve the folks that are coming through, cook the food.
You talk about serving the needs of the consumer. What's the difference? Boston's a small city, Massachusetts, small state, but what's the customer needs of a downtown Boston location versus a suburban location? Does it differ?
It differs somewhat, but I think there's some adaptability for brands. And I'll give you an example of like the restaurant I have, Sip Wine Bar, okay? At the time when we got first involved with Federal, our vision wasn't that restaurant. We didn't think that would be the place that would be the first restaurant opening in the project. We thought Mexican was more mainstream, more fun, more casual. And that's sort of why we said, well, we use that brand. We operated a number of different brands over the years. And part of it also works with their master plan. They don't want to put a Mexican guy next to a guy who's sort of Mexican, and the seafood place next to another guy who's half seafood. So it's sort of like a balancing act for both of us. Say, well, can you do this? And then it's also about price points. If I came in and I was serving $68 steaks, it wouldn't work. Not for that location, not for that style of restaurant. So there's a blend of all these different things, and there's dialogue that we have from tenant to landlord, and they say, well, you might want to take that big stuffed lobster off the menu because you're not going to sell it. And price points play a role. They do play a role.
But you talk about the relationship between landlord and owner changing over the course of the last 4 years. I mean, we had a series, you and I talked about that a little bit earlier on. We had 2 years where you had to talk to folks about how do we get you to the back end of this thing. So it's a two-part question. That's changed, but the variability on the level of expertise on an owner is incredibly vast in restaurants. I mean, you're an exceptionally great operator and always have been. You've got new people that come into the market that want to be a part of that too. So those conversations that you're having with people about getting started and continuing on have to be different from person to person.
It does vary. And I think I'd like to touch a little bit on one of the things you just mentioned as it relates to the relationship side of things coming out of COVID. You know, that 2-year window was obviously a nightmare for everybody. But one of the biggest takeaways, I think, as an owner that we had, or as a company, is the importance of those relationships that we have. We worked with all of our tenants to ensure that we got through this together. We put a lot of our resources to helping, promote their businesses when they reopened. We have a dedicated marketing team at Assembly Row that, boots on the ground. They work with all of our tenants day in and day out. So I think that coming out of that mess, a lot of these restaurant owners really they're looking at the relationships they have with their landlords a little bit differently. And, is it truly a partnership, or is it just someone I send my rent check to every month? And so I do think it's incredibly important to, work with our tenants and have good relationships with them.
Absolutely.
And I think a great part about all that too is as sad as it is that the challenge of COVID closed restaurants, it also created opportunity for restaurants that were able or willing to go into an existing space where a lot of the infrastructure is already set up for them and adjust and make a new concept. So tragedy creates opportunity as well.
There was a lot of restaurants that were sunsetting and they didn't realize it, and the pandemic just got them there quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And an opportunity for new, better operators to come in with more invigorated to do different concepts and different stuff, I think was a good thing, right, for the industry.
And there's some people that made it through the pandemic and then they're like, you know what, I don't know if I could do that again. And so the pandemic didn't drive them out, but 18 months later they said, you know what, I think I want to move on. Or the second generation doesn't want it, or what have you. And so we're seeing a lot of turnover in the industry. And we have the privilege of representing restaurateurs, and everyone loves restaurants and everyone wants restaurants in their communities. But we often get questions from cities and towns. How do I bring more restaurants into my city? Or XYZ location closed, how do I attract restaurateurs? As a restaurateur who goes out and looks where they can expand, what are some things that cities and towns can do to make themselves more attractive to operators trying to come into them?
In my experience, the permitting process in any given town can be sometimes easy and sometimes a nightmare. And for a lot of operators or restaurant owners, no matter what it is, there's a level of intimidation because they're not really sure. They're not like a builder that goes and pulls permits all the
They
time.
They can't fight City Hall, but they want to fight City Hall.
And sometimes
not Boston City Hall, all the City Halls.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And you could be into a project, and I've experienced this where the rules changed. The plans were all set and it was accepted, and then now it's time for the inspection. You're ready to open. Oh, you can't do this. You need to do this. I'm like, well, it was approved. So ways of streamlining it, ease relationships. Usually there are people with the chambers of commerce that do help. And there's sometimes they understand, like your back's to the wall, you have all your money tied up in a project and you're not monetizing it. And you have your landlord calling you like, when are you gonna open? When are you gonna open? I'm waiting for this. And ironically, it's like any challenge that you have, it's just like you keep driving at it. And sooner or later you cross the bump, but it's just like, you just take a deep breath and keep pushing forward. But I would really say like the permitting process and the ease of it, even applications that now, like even the city of Somerville has done a lot with Citizen Serve, which is their online format. So it makes it a lot easier. The less in-person stuff that you can deal with saves time. An hour for me going to and from City Hall, keeps me in the trenches, helps me operate better, helps me be a face of a brand as opposed to standing in line saying, here's my check for my annual liquor license. So a lot of the stuff they're doing with technology has helped. I just think that that's the one thing that cities and towns can really do for the owner, the restaurant owner, is make it easy for them.
Absolutely. And that's some of the messages that we've put out to the cities and towns as well and I don't think they realize that, you're paying for the architect to come to the community meeting, and then the community person that says, I don't like that tree over there, and then you have to come back with another rendering, and then you're paying everyone to be there, and you're paying for a restaurant that's not generating any revenue. It's one of the hurdles of municipal government that we try to get them to a spot of at least understanding the process they're putting restaurateurs through, because it's costing money.
And it's a benefit to them as well, because with the meals tax that the cities are getting, most do, and even employment, giving people in their town an opportunity to have a job in their town and supporting it, kids in the schools, places to go. So you would think that in the whole idea, it would be a much easier road.
It's got to be easier working with federal or somebody like that, because they've got a lot of that stuff built out into what they've already done as far as the development of the project, right, with the city. And I know Somerville probably wasn't really easy early on for you folks, right?
Early on, no, but we have clearly proven ourselves, but we also today have such a great relationship with them. Everything, for the most part, is streamlined. As Chris mentioned, it's again, I keep using the word partnership, but these partnerships is what creates the long-term success for people. And so I think that having this relationship with the city has allowed us to get turn permits quickly, generally 4 to 6 weeks on average is what we're seeing. The liquor license process has been fairly, streamlined as well. So I do think that, working with a larger landlord, a larger owner like Federal helps cut through some of that red tape that some of these other, restaurant owners might otherwise face.
Chris, are you seeing it would affect you, excuse me, just based on the way the new clientele is dealing with food, right? A lot of it's going out the door. A lot of it really you don't have the staff necessarily to do, a full service kind of environment. Are you looking in your head or in future concepts thinking about, making it more counter service driven, more out the door driven, and how would that impact the size of a footprint? And because we're hearing that, right? We're hearing
there are companies that are doing it now.
Yeah.
Smaller square footages, less dining room space, more productivity per square foot in the back of the house.
Sure.
That's generating the money. I would venture a guess that even with technology, handhelds at tables eliminates every three servers eliminates a server, because they can handle more, because the steps back and forth from the table to ring something in. It's about productivity. If I can stand here and handle 2 stations, I eliminate a guy. And it's not that we don't want to hire. It's just that the expenses of trying to find them, retain them, and even enforcing your standards, if they're too difficult, punctuality, and you write somebody up and then they decide, the next day they're late, they're across the street working for let's say, your neighborhood partner that night, because we're in that type of a bind. So to answer your question, yes, I've done that actually. And we looked at that with ingredients that were perishables through COVID, that we'd say, okay, we're buying this. And if we can't move it just based on volume, we have to re-engineer menus. And so you're using products that you be multifaceted. Maybe it's like if you're using a piece of cod or something like that, you're using it for a taco, you're using it for an entree, you're multi-purposing the product. So at least now you can get volume, which also keeps your relationship going with your vendors. They have a reason to stop the truck at your restaurant. But yeah, I really believe that even when you talk about ingredients and production lists and so on and so forth, to accomplish a menu, strip it back a little bit makes it a lot easier.
You got to have stuff that travels too now, because a lot of it's going out the door, right? You want to make sure it shows up in the doorstep the way. Are you seeing any of that compression of the restaurant space?
We are a little bit. One of the things that's become incredibly important is, of course, outdoor seating. And when we design our spaces, how are we thinking about that outdoor space to really, encourage people to spend time at the restaurants? We also are seeing a lot of these, like Shake Shack, for example, Union Square Donuts, where we intentionally helped them design, storefronts that include pickup windows so that people can just quickly walk up and grab what they need and go. So we're trying to be ahead of, just strictly from a design standpoint, we're trying to get ahead of what the needs are to help drive traffic to these restaurant tenants.
Those walk-up windows are happening.
Yeah.
I remember Tasty Burger did it years ago down in the Fenway, and I go, you're out of your mind. People aren't going to walk up and grab a... No, they do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about the evolution of outdoor, I mean, who would have thought in Massachusetts that people would want to sit outside in March and April or October, November? But, that was something that happened during the pandemic, and it's kind of here to stay. I mean, some people needed to do it but a lot of people have made it part of their business plan, whether it's heaters, et cetera, and then revitalizing outdoor space. How much effort do you put into bringing more things outdoor to bring people there to patronize the restaurants? Are there, there's community events, there's, et cetera.
Sure.
That seems to be like the next step of the landlord relationship.
Yes.
Which is bringing people in, bringing events in to patronize the restaurants as it's happening.
I will say Federal Realty as a company has always been, in my opinion, at the forefront from a real estate design standpoint. When we look at our shopping centers or our mixed-use neighborhoods, we always think about those, what we call them outdoor living rooms. So we want to encourage a sense of place. We want to encourage people to come spend time and feel comfortable walking, our neighborhoods or our shopping centers. So it has become a very important, it's almost a necessary part of our design conversations as we think about how we build or how we merchandise our shopping centers.
We always talk about restaurant growth and restaurant retraction, and every restaurateur that has a lot of success has had some restaurants that they've had to close and had to move on from. As someone who has had that roller coaster of opening a bunch of places, pulling back on a couple others, when do you pull the plug? When do you realize that a place maybe doesn't work out and we have to, reevaluate and go someplace else?
Well, I like to think of it as being a cautious optimist as opposed to a pessimist. And what you try and do is you figure out what is the least amount that you need to survive. That's not necessarily earning an income. That's to keep people employed, pay the rent, keep the lights on, and take care of the community. And you can carry a unit for a long time as long as you're structured that way. It comes down to how much money you spent in a build out. What is your debt load? What products are you purchasing? What are you paying people? And as long as you're working tight numbers, you can carry stuff for a while. And I've had this exact thing happen. And it's interesting that we talk about being on the water in Seaport. I at one time owned a restaurant bar in a marina that looked at Boston. And it was super successful. And then as Seaport started, first year, down 20%. Second year, down another 20%. And it was seasonal business, most of it. Now seasonality is a lot different, right? But I used to say, it's not really, I always thought it was about the Boston skyline. You could look in at the city. It wasn't about that. It was about being on the water. Because if you're looking out from Seaport, you're looking at water. Looking in from Charlestown, you're looking at a skyline. And I just watched it and I said, okay, I got 3 years left, 20%, another 10, I'm done with this lease. So you don't renew. So it's really paying attention to what's going on. Or you take the opportunity to reposition it and say, okay, this is what's going on now. And my first lease at Assembly Row is Papagayo. It's 10 years old right now. So you say, okay, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to keep it as Papagayo? Am I going to do a revamp of it? Am I going to take the whole place and I'll call it a lipstick job, but change it, stay in the same genre? But right now it is the oldest business in the project. So you say to yourself, I'm tired of looking at it too. And I'm sure the people that have been there, like, you got to keep things new and exciting. And I think that's sometimes you use what's going on in your world and what's also not just socially, but in the demographics of food and beverage. What else is going on out there? And that segment has been redefined by a lot of amazing operators. So you pay attention to what they're doing and say, okay, the math makes sense. Let's do it again.
Yeah, everything rebrands after a certain amount of time, right? I mean, in order to stay fresh, you kind of have to.
Yeah. And then how is that conversation from the landlord perspective? The landlord might say, "Oh, that's a successful concept. Why do you want to change it?" How does that back and forth go? Is it a give and take? Is it a no? I want you need to stay this because it's that, or is it?
They know.
They know. They know what they want.
They know. They might know before the operator knows.
They probably do.
Well, and that's actually quite true. I mean, in many cases, we track sales from our tenants, our restaurants and retailers. So we usually have a good gauge of how they're performing and what the trends are. And so we can plan ahead. When we know a lease might be expiring, we can engage with the tenant and start having, get those conversations going so that we can figure out, look, your sales have dropped 20% or whatever it might be, but you're a great operator. We enjoy this relationship. How are you thinking about your future in this property? And so to Chris's point, we're having these conversations well in advance.
Sure.
But in some cases, usually if a restaurant is really performing well, they don't want to reconcept. I mean, from my experience on the landlord side, it's usually something is not performing well, in which case we want them to reinvest and shift their focus into rebranding or whatever it is. Because, if our restaurants are doing well, then effectively the whole property should be doing well since they're driving so much of the traffic.
So somebody would make the case that you've got all of this beautiful retail space that is up for lease. Does Federal ever think about getting into the restaurant business themselves? Or do they leave that to the restaurateurs?
It's a great question. In some cases, in some instances, we have partnered with restaurants as more of a sort of silent investor, but we don't really do that anymore, with the cost of capital and everything else. But if there's a property that's, a new ground up development where we need to secure 2 or 3 game changer restaurant tenants, we will definitely think creatively about how we get that deal done.
So what happens next? You have a very well-run, well-built out place. And I don't even know, is Assembly Row fully built out? Is there more on the horizon?
We have one more phase.
Okay.
And then after that, we're looking way ahead at what we do with, the marketplace, Assembly Square Marketplace. And, there's a ton of new development happening right now that we don't own and control, but that's within walking distance of Assembly. So it's very exciting.
It is.
So that's, did that answer your question?
That was A for that location, but are there other non-Assembly Row locations on the horizon? Could Assembly Row be replicated someplace else in Massachusetts? Is the focus on that type of thing, or is it just run what you have, or is it expand?
I think we're content with what we have. I don't see us building another Assembly Row in this market anytime soon. We own about 8 other shopping centers, I oversee 8 other shopping centers in this region. And so we're really focused on reinvesting and improving those assets. And how do we reposition restaurants that might need, to be replaced in some cases? How do we, again, reinvigorate some of our existing properties? So that's really the focus. And to your earlier question about the outdoor space, Linden Square in Wellesley is another one. That's another one of my properties. And we just, finished a $7 million renovation of the property to improve those outdoor living rooms and placemaking and better signage for tenants and increase the outdoor seating area for our restaurants. And so that's really where our focus is now.
What does the shopping center of the future look like?
I think it's Assembly Row.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I think it's very similar to that, where you have that live, work, play type of offering.
Close to public transportation.
Close to public transit. It doesn't hurt that we're on the Mystic River. I never thought I'd hear myself saying that growing up there.
True.
But
even the producers of the movie Mystic River probably didn't think that as well.
Right.
But having all of those amenities, I think, that's where the future is for real estate.
If you look at those lifestyle centers around the Beltway, they've got outdoor movie theaters. There's a bunch of green space. Everybody's got outdoor space down there. I know the weather's a little bit warmer down there, but I think the major question is, when are you going to put the gondola system in from Assembly Road to the Encore?
That's the $1 million question.
It's like takes you 3 hours to get around from there to there.
Yeah, it's very deceiving when I walk the property with tenants and brokers or whoever, and they say, "Oh, I didn't realize you had a casino here." I said, "Oh no, it's actually, half an hour away from here if you're driving."
True.
So I don't think they're planning to do the gondola. The last I heard, and Federal is not involved in this at all. It's between the state and the city of Somerville, but in Everett. From what I understand, they're planning a pedestrian footbridge to connect the one of the head houses of the T station at Assembly to Encore, which I think will be great.
So we got to put video cameras over that to see the people walking back, whether they're skipping or they got their head down.
Right. And then there's so much opportunity for development happening over there.
Or jumping.
Or jumping. Exactly. But you have, the Kraft family looking at a potential soccer stadium.
Mm-hmm.
There's Encore wants to expand themselves. Just unbelievable development happening in that area. It's exciting that it's happening, but it creates more competition.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
It has to keep everyone on their game. What's next for you?
Just plugging right along.
Looking for new opportunities, right?
Always looking, always listening. I'm probably looking towards, I just opened a restaurant, 8 months ago. So we're working on really solidifying the talent behind that. And I might end up repositioning one of my other restaurants. It's just, it's up in the air right now. It's still trying times, like when you talk about cost of capital and all that type of stuff. So
food,
labor,
capital,
food, everything. So it's really about dialing the operations in and being as efficient, as smart as you can with it. So I'd love to go back to that growth phase back in the day when I think I opened 4 restaurants in 18 months at one time. Like, look back at that and say, it was before gray hair, you know? So
True.
We're going to get you out of here on the Sprague Energy lightning round. Fast questions coming at you.
Uh-oh.
Before we get into the Sprague Energy lightning round, I'm going to give you a dedicated question as a chef. Favorite thing to prepare?
favorite thing for me to prepare?
Yeah.
Depends on the time. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, like deep fried turkey, no one ever heard of it up here, but I was doing that in the late 80s. So I'd say something like that would be fun. Now everybody does it. Now probably homemade pasta or homemade ravioli, something Italian that was really homey. Fresh tomato pan sauce,
Awesome.
plucked basil from the garden, shaved Romano.
What time's dinner?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we went rogue. We went rogue on our Sprague Energy question. Sometimes we have dedicated questions for chefs, so that's why we went there. So, okay, it's your last meal on earth. What are you having?
Big steak.
Steak.
Yeah, big juicy.
Wrong with that.
fillet. Yeah.
What are you having?
I'm probably something like that. I'm going surf and turf, though.
Okay.
Oh.
It's going to be maybe caviar with bone marrow and a fried oyster on crusty bread as an appetizer, and then maybe beef Wellington as a dinner.
Chris, you need to start doing videos for your
Wow.
Exactly.
Because
If you notice, I just started talking with my hands, so I'm like,
You're feeling the
I can
excitement.
feel it.
just don't bang the table.
No,
or
I'm-
see what-
Yeah. We have very tight, right? Very a lot of rules at the MRA podcast. What's your ideal vacation spot?
I like a place where I can unplug, and I can't do it unless I'm on a plane. So I'd say Mexico, probably something like that. And truthfully, a lot of my history with the food and beverage segment for me is Border Cafes years ago. So since 1987, Mexico.
Anywhere in Europe, Italy. I'd love to get to Italy in the next couple of months with the family. But yeah, we do the island trips every year, and I think now it's time to get out and see the world.
Italy's hot. A lot of people go to Italy
Yeah.
We did.
recently. Carrie did it recently.
Did you?
We did
Oh.
10 days on the Amalfi Coast. It was
Oh,
awesome.
beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
Who has inspired you the most?
Oh gosh, these questions. You know what? There's not really just one person. I will say there is a very talented pool of strong, smart, talented women in my industry who have sort of paved the way for the next generation of women, retail real estate people. And so I keep in touch with a lot of my former mentors, and I think that and I let them know how much they mean to me and how much I value what they've done
Great.
for our side of things.
What about you?
I would have to say my dad, and it's over some things that, I'm one of 7, the struggles that they had as parents trying to raise kids on one salary. And he'd said to me a long time ago, live your life like you're writing your epitaph every day.
Mm.
Now, interestingly enough, I don't always live my life that way, but I strive to be the man that he was.
Amazing.
If you're drinking something, what are you drinking?
Back to the depending when, margarita or martini, both with M's.
What are you drinking?
New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, for
Okay.
sure. Or
I was
cocktails.
going to say, I didn't bring that.
Or one of Chris's famous cocktails.
Yeah, I didn't get that memo. I would have had a bottle for you.
What's your go-to type of cuisine?
Italian. It's just comfort food.
Yeah.
I'd have to agree. That or seafood.
Okay. This is the tricky one. This one you got to think on.
Do I need another sip?
You might need a sip. If you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead,
Oh
Who's
my
at the table
gosh,
with you?
these questions. I would have to say probably my uncle, who passed away at a very early age. He was a prominent architect in Boston. I was young when he passed away, and I think it would be really interesting to connect with him and show him what I've been up to all these years.
That's awesome.
I'd probably say Abe Lincoln. Put together a team of people that would normally work together well,
Yeah.
and it's a metaphor for what we're doing day in and
Cabinet
day
of his
out.
opponents, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
team of rivals.
Absolutely. That's it.
Wow.
Awesome.
So we have Liz Ryan, Vice President of Regional Leasing Federal Realty. Chris Damian, Chef Owner, Papagayo, SIP, Civility Social House. Thank you very much for
Thank
joining
you.
us in today's episode.
Thanks much.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
both.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Good job. Can we tap the table now?
Steve, with marketing being one of the Achilles heels for restaurateurs, who's our go-to for marketing, public relations, and social media?
That's going to be our great friends at IUC, Image Unlimited Communications. Maddie, where can we find you?
You can find us on socials at IUC Boston.
Or also on web, iucboston.com.
Thanks, Lily.
Yeah.
IUC.
Woo.
Follow us.